So thank you again for joining us today to learn about Foster America's efforts to realize a future in which families get the support that they want, that they need, and that they deserve in their own communities and without involvement in the child welfare system. My name is Susan Notkin, and I have the privilege of chairing the Foster America Board. Throughout my career, I worked with so many inspired colleagues to try to reform and transform child welfare in our country. And what drove that collective work is a deep commitment to social justice and to equity. And a further impetus is the belief that our society would thrive, and I would say can only thrive, if we invested sufficiently and strategically in supporting and strengthening families as they go about caring for their children. Around 18 months ago, Foster America dedicated itself to reimagining such a future by creating new community-based systems of supports for families. So working side by side with families who are impacted by the child welfare system, with community organizations and leaders, with public child welfare agencies, staff, and leadership, Foster America is now poised to share with you what we're learning about pursuing a more just, a more humane, and a more caring approach for helping families in need. So once again, I want to thank you for joining us. And it's now my honor to turn it over to Foster America's Executive Director, Marie Zembler-Wu, who will be telling us about some of the exciting work that we're supporting. Thank you again, and hi, Marie.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. Welcome to everyone in the audience today at the Foster America Summit. What a joy it is to have everyone here and see your names in the audience. I'll do a quick orientation to what we'll be doing with our hour together today, and then sharing a few remarks to start us off. I will indeed be our beginning today, and then soon you'll be joined by Brian Clapier, our Senior Vice President of Programs, who's going to welcome several of our staff to share some of the details of our change makers, circles, and work, and the ways that we're doing our strategic work on the ground, heard from the voices of several of the directors of our organization. At the end of today, there'll be room for your questions and answers, and through the duration of our time together, you can use the question and answer function to raise the questions that you might like us to address later on. So please turn on that Q&A and have those questions flowing, including because some of them might be answered by virtual chat along the way in the conversation. So all the panelists will then return at the end to address some questions from the audience. But before we dive in, I just wanted to take a few moments to say what a joy it is to have all of you here. We put out a call across our network, and to see such a diversity of friends, both new and old, show up in the room is just a delight for me. Here we have our staff. We have alumni of our original fellowship model. We have people from early in my career I see on the group, early supporters of Foster America, and some new connections too. Among you are partners inside of the public sector, community members, and people whose lives have been shaped by child welfare, who are now striving to see something better happening in the next generation. Within this network are the people who sustain me personally in the very hard work of running an organization, of working for social justice and change, and of fueling our mission to transform systems until every family thrives. So I really want to start out by thanking you for being here. I know that I'm not alone in the feeling that relationships are what sustains me, that relationships are ultimately what matters the most. Now, you don't need to take my word for that. Evidence actually affirms this across a range of disciplines. In education, the strength of connection between a student and a teacher predicts test scores. In mentoring, a single adult connection can bend the curve to help a young person heal and succeed, even in the face of significant trauma. Even in our workplaces, it's not money or workload, but negative relationships with a boss that predicts most resignations, and having an office best friend that predicts long-lasting retention. I say all this because it is against this backdrop of relationships that I want to talk with you today about what I see as the persistent problem with the child welfare system. It is the largest, most organized, and most prominent investment as a society that we make in our children, youth, and families. But its very premise of organization is built around interrupting and disrupting the very most precious, protective thing for kids, relationships. Let me just tell you a little bit more about what I mean. Across the country, every state and county, by virtue of federal law, offers a Department of Child and Family Services. And those departments must do two things. They must screen calls of potential child abuse and neglect, and they must provide out-of-home foster care services. And in the mix of these two activities, investigation and separations into foster care, we spend $31 billion annually, with the overwhelming lion's share of those dollars going to the foster care system. Foster care interrupts relationships. With this audience, I know that we tend to know that very few of those separations are motivated by the physical or sexual abuse that makes the headlines. Most of these cases are of perceived neglect, conditions like unstable housing or insufficient supervision, which are very closely bound up with the conditions of poverty. And that foster care separation is traumatic. Former foster youth have higher rates of PTSD than do combat veterans. The experience of foster care exacerbates the chances of every worst case outcome: juvenile justice involvement, adult incarceration, the experience of homelessness, commercial sexual exploitation, suicidality, and intergenerationally, the chances of losing one's own children into foster care. The federal mandates mean that 7 million children each year are the subject of a hotline call. When we look across the course of childhood, more than a third of all kids will have their parents investigated by Child Protection over the course of time they grow up, and that rate is over half for parents of Black children. This is a system that is overly activated and racially inequitable in investigation. And most often, after these terrible and harmful experiences of being investigated, nothing is actually what happens next. Of those 7 million kids who are called in, for about 5.5 million, no services or supports will next be delivered. Systematically, we're sowing harm and distrust at a very wide scale. But what we're not doing is cultivating family support. This is why in our new strategy, as Susan was mentioning, Foster America is centering efforts that reduce our collective reliance on investigation and foster care, and working instead to build approaches to support well-being in the ways that families really need and want. Foster America is far from alone in working for this transformation. But here's what I see as definitional to this moment in child welfare. We're really asking the questions: can the system change? How? What will it actually take? And the fact is, we don't know the answer to those questions. But we do know is that we have every reason to try, and to try right now. So that's why I want to share with you that I'm in front of you today, both very hopeful and very determined by this moment. I think there's 3 big reasons for this. First, I see that we're facing an ever-expanding societal awareness of racial bias, inequity, and its structural roots, specifically in the child welfare and foster care system. Let me read to you a recent headline. "The child welfare system is failing children, separating Black and brown families." Can you imagine what the source of this is? It's Teen Vogue. There's a growing public awareness, indeed a growing movement to spur change. Second, we have enabling legislation. Child welfare as a field 5 years ago experienced the game-changing Family First Prevention Services Act. And this is a really imperfect law. It's extremely challenging in its particulars to implement, and there are certainly some dangers of unintended consequences. But for the first time, it says that federal investment is not only for foster and group care, but instead could fund services to keep families together rather than apart. Now, this isn't yet meaningfully changing the funding on the ground, but it has most certainly stirred conversation, mindset shifts, and hopefully will continue to stir shifts on the ground of what the law's potential includes. Finally, and I think this is the most important and something I hope you'll listen for as the program team joins me on this call later today. I believe this is a moment of opportunity because of the voices of lived experience. While the approaches are not all yet well defined, and this is not always happening elegantly, I think this is a time of unprecedented commitment, especially in public sector partners, to truly listen to the voices of those most impacted by these systems. So while change won't be easy or fast, these factors are really bringing me to my work every day, feeling like this is a defining moment in our generation, that this is our chance to make today's investigation and foster care system become largely obsolete by replacing it with voluntary, community-delivered approaches that are really what families want. So that brings me to the last topic. At this moment, both of opportunities and of thousands of questions about how can this happen? What will we do? What is it that Foster America is doing? Well, here I want to return us to where I started, relationships. The field of child welfare itself, for too long, has worked in isolation. So that's why we've committed for Foster America to live and work at a critical intersection, where the boldest local governments, the ones that share our values for racial equity and our commitment to transformative change, meet up and collaborate with visionary partners in the local communities that they serve. At this intersection, Foster America is working to build relationships, and we're really doing this in a couple of specific ways. One about building leadership capacity, and the other about doing innovative work centered around equity with some really specific strategies at the core. Our hope is to demonstrate alternatives really can work so that we can drive transformation throughout our field. Our team is going to join me shortly and share a lot more about that actual how, and they'll do far better than I could. But before we get to them, I wanted to just give you a brief window into our work in the field by sharing a video of some of the voices and collaborators we're engaged with in Colorado.
There's a lot of people that have experienced the system, and they don't realize that their trauma is what can teach the system to change.
Together, Foster America and Colorado are actively including those who have experienced the system firsthand in determining the changes of the future.
We cannot, we should not, we do not want to move forward in a new, improved, re-envisioned Colorado child welfare system without your voice at the table.
And I feel like this is that unique moment in time where lived experts have a moment to stand up and go, this is what went wrong, and this is how we can fix it.
When we outreach to families, we not only hear a bit of surprise, but we hear from folks that they are ready to share a voice. They're ready to give us ideas and how we can help transform the system together.
I think it's revolutionary, the work that Colorado's doing.
It's not just give me this information, vent to me about this. It's, I'm gonna take this is feedback we need to do better, and here's how we're gonna do better, so that's where transparency comes into place.
I think when people are engaged in that kind of work, when they have the space in their hearts and their minds to really take that step back, that to me is like the reason I keep building Foster America, the reason I keep coming to work every day.
As a lived expert, I feel privileged. I want my children to grow up one day and go, my mom paved the way for me.
Foster America's work is generational. We won't see the results overnight, but I'm really hopeful, especially about the work here in Colorado, where they're really rolling up their sleeves and figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and what will ultimately become the infrastructure of different ways of doing business in the future.
Progress is slow, and I think that's okay. I'm confident that we can get there, one step at a time, one day at a time, one family at a time.
I'm pleased to welcome my colleague, our Senior Vice President of Programs, Brian Clapier, to tell us more about Foster America's work. Thanks, Brian.
Marie, so glad to be here and so glad to be part of the work at Foster America. And we're going to start by talking a little bit about our Changemakers work. And the Changemakers work really aims to take all the learnings from our prior fellowships and the best of those learnings and really apply them to a broad range of leaders across, child welfare. We really look in the Changemakers to organize the fellows into areas of influence and areas of desired growth. And specifically, we've really been focusing on work with persons impacted by child welfare. And so, circles around building leadership inside of what we call national leadership circles. And then more recently launched a fiscal leadership circle aimed at building leadership inside those. So I'm thrilled to be joined right now by Desiree Thomas, who's our Director of Capacity Building, and DL Moffitt, who's our fiscal specialist. And just so excited about your work, Des, so excited about your work, DL. I'm thrilled that you get the chance to talk about your work in this forum, and I'm just so excited to hear from you. I think, Des, if we could just start by hearing a little bit about the National Leadership Circle and your fantastic work there.
Thank you, Brian. The National Leadership Circle is a fellowship for people impacted by the child welfare system. The first circle was launched in May of 2023, and I'm honored to say that it was developed and facilitated by three amazing women, Shalita O'Neill, Dr. April Allen, and our very own Dr. Niche Parley, Dr. Denisha Parley, who's also a Foster America alum. They provided leadership coaching, skill development, a space for community and healing, and project development. Our fellows came in, as you can see, all very established in their careers, with projects geared towards innovations within the child welfare system. They use their fellowship time to develop their pitches for their projects, and was able, in an event that we called Sharks with a Heart, to make their pitch before some very influential child welfare stakeholders at the end of their fellowship, where they were able to receive feedback and resource information to move their projects forward. Currently, we are planning our next National Leadership Circle to kick off and launch in October. We are considering early stage and aspiring adult leaders who have personally experienced the child welfare system and are looking to develop leadership and professional skills to support their work and their success where they are functioning as lived experts.
Des, fantastic. I always love hearing about the National Leadership Circle. And I want to thank you for your work in it, but also thank you for reminding me and saying the names April, Shalita, and Dr. Niche, because what a fantastic job they did with this. And I also was reminded as you were talking about the Sharks with the Heart idea and just that wonderful event. And folks, you heard Des say, we are launching National Leadership Circle 2.0 in the fall. And so look for more information about that. And Des, just thank you for your work on that. DL, it would be great to hear a little bit about the Fiscal Leadership Circle and kind of the origin story of that and kind of the work of the Leadership Circle. So why don't we go to you next?
Absolutely. Great to have the opportunity. So broadly, the Fiscal Leadership Circle, or fondly named FLC, brings together child welfare fiscal leaders to tailor projects that are focused on preventing system involvement and keeping kids out of foster care. Currently, as you can see on the slide, $31 billion a year is spent, over $31 billion is spent on child welfare nationwide, yet little of it goes to prevention. Next slide. As the inaugural cohort of 14 fellows exchange ideas and knowledge, we will develop insights into the fiscal conditions of 11 jurisdictions needed to develop innovations and transform child welfare toward prevention. You can see we have Kevin over in California, Sam in Wisconsin, Dustin in Wisconsin, Jude in Kentucky, just a broad range of fellows that we see here that we're able to engage with. Next slide. So when it comes to the why, it's really about embracing what innovation means at the intersection of child welfare and finance. We believe that they belong together. So what's timely in transformation work is to change how money is spent, which means hands-on efforts to figure out how to invest in programs available to families in their own communities where they can get the help before that they need before the point of crisis. Next slide. Actually, could we go back to that slide real quick? I'm so sorry. Yes, and so the fellows come with projects that they experience and a curriculum that's been focused on child welfare financing as well as adaptive leadership. And so we have projects that are focused on expanding the use of prevention funding streams, first by maximizing Family First, and then exploring TANF, as well as Medicaid. We have some fellows that are focused on measuring the return on investment, like in New York City. Also blending or braiding available funding streams at both the state level as well as the community-based organization level. And then lastly, developing performance-based contracting models for prevention services. So these are just a few of the projects that we're exploring in the Fiscal Leadership Circle. Brian, back to you.
DL, thank you. And just always reminded that the Fiscal Leadership Circle is one of the most exciting things of 2024 so far. And you're both a huge part of it with your leadership. I was reminded as you were talking, DL, that one of our faculty said in the first session, we often hear what gets measured happens. And what she said was actually what gets paid for gets measured, and that's what happens. And just so super excited about the work in this circle, and just want to thank both you guys. So thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to shift next, and Courtney, we can go to the next slide, to thinking about innovation across 4 areas. And we're going to meet a few more leaders from Foster America. You know, you're going to meet Angela Lytle next, and she's going to come on the screen, and she's going to talk a little bit about co-design. You saw some, we all saw in the video some of the great work being done in Colorado. Angela is our site director for the state of Colorado, and she's going to talk right now about Colorado and how you incorporate co-design.
Thank you, Brian, and hello and welcome to everyone in the audience. It's really good to have you. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video. It's fun to use that sort of media to really share some awesome news. Foster America has been well established in Colorado for a handful of years, and through those developed relationships, courageous conversations have led to dynamic action steps, which are now leading to some measurable and actually meaningful outcomes for the families and children that we serve in the child welfare system. One of the greatest examples of co-design in Colorado was the launching of the Reimagining Steering Committee that was launched by the Division of Child Welfare under their Director of Child Welfare a handful of years ago, 2022. And you can see on the screen that there are 3 primary buckets of focus for this work. One is elevating the family voice, not just bringing people to the table, actually allowing their voices to lead our work. The other is assuring that we're advancing racial and other equities in the child welfare system, and then streamlining families' access to resources and supported services in their communities when they need those. The co-design process really leads to high levels of buy-in, ownership, shared accountability, and ultimately the best outcomes for kids and families. Back to you, Brian.
Thanks, Angela. And I love this experience about how do we amplify family voice, how do we increase equity, and how do we streamline services. And you know, so excited when I see the videos and hear about the work, but also if anyone ever gets a chance, please take a chance to visit the folks in Colorado and the steering committee. What a fantastic group of folks. We're going to shift next to Emily Ente, who's our project director for Thriving Families, Safer Children, and really think about a little bit about collaboration. And so, Emily, could you talk a little bit about Thriving Families, Safer Children, kind of what it is and how you work to support collaboration?
I'm glad to. Thank you so much, Brian. Pleasure to be here. Thriving Families, Safer Children is a national movement for child, youth, and family well-being. It's really a first of its kind collaboration between lived expert leaders and 5 national organizations
including philanthropic partners, the Annie E. Casey Foundation and Casey Family Programs, nonprofit Prevent Child Abuse America, and 2 federal agencies, the Children's Bureau and the Center for Disease Control's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. The national partners are joined by 22 jurisdictions across the country that you can see on the map who've signed on as partners in this movement. Together, the partners in Thriving Families envision a world in which all children, youth, and families can live in just and equitable communities with the supports, opportunities, and resources they need to thrive and remain free of unnecessary child welfare system involvement. At the heart of our work, and to accomplish this, we believe in the importance of 4 guiding principles: partnering with lived expert leaders, centering the work in communities, addressing issues of racial equity and disproportionality, and emphasizing the upstream strategies for prevention, health promotion, and well-being. Each of the 22 Thriving Families sites has established its own approach for the work in alignment with these values and based on their local goals, conditions, and what we're hearing from people on the ground. This kind of collaboration is not easy and takes support nationally, both across the partners and in support of the sites. That's why I'm privileged to work with Foster America to provide an essential project coordination role, supporting the national governing committees of Thriving Families, Safer Children, and leading efforts to better connect the Thriving Families sites and lived expert participants with the support and resources they need. So thanks for the opportunity, Brian. I'll turn it back to you.
Emily, thank you for the hard work that you do. And I was just thinking as you were talking, what an effort, right, to get all the partners and the sites who have a clear vision and want to go somewhere, moving in the same direction and same lockstep. So, you know, this collaboration is really a strong example of what can be done when many people focus on the same values and mission. So thank you. We heard about co-design in Colorado. We heard about some collaboration here. We want to think next, you know, just a little bit about finance. And Angela, we're going to come back to Colorado, if that's okay, and just hear about this fantastic work that you guys have been doing in Larimer County with the Warm Line.
Great, it's absolutely okay. You heard in Marie's opening remarks that research strongly indicates that if a family's basic needs are met as early as the first alert to acute stress, the likelihood of that stress rising to the level of the attention of the child welfare system decreases significantly. Acute stress at the family level decreases significantly, and the stability in a family increases so that they are able to safely meet the needs of their children. About 4 years ago, Larimer County, which is the Fort Collins area of Colorado, northern part, applied for and was awarded a 5-year ACF grant to build what they're now referring to as sort of this warm line concept, using community navigators who are people within their community who have been impacted in some way by the child welfare system, lived experts paid for their expertise with state and other dollars to bring their partnership to the front lines when families need some assistance. Example, mandatory reporters now are calling the Navigator line before they call the child abuse hotline because they need some consultation, they need some ideas, they need some thoughts about how to connect families to resources. It's decreased the number of calls to the hotline in Larimer County, and those served by the navigators are far less likely, research is finding, to ever come to the attention of the child welfare system. That is an amazing change at the community level. The next steps with this work is to wrap around this model of community response fiscal sustainability. How do we build a fiscal model around a warm line concept, a community-based navigator, lived expert concept to help meet the needs of families within their own community, decreasing the demand and the pressure on the child welfare system to allow it to do what it needs to do really well. Thanks for letting us share that.
Angela, thanks for sharing that. And I was just reflecting as you were talking about, you know, the struggle that a lot of mandated reporters have, where they know that the family needs some help, right? And there seems to be no other option than to call the hotline, right? And they feel forced to do that. And it's been exciting to kind of run alongside this, for me to run alongside your work in Larimer County and just in Foster America's work and just hear about this, like setting up alternatives, right? And it connects, as you're talking, it connects right back to what we heard Desiree and DL talk about with the Fiscal Leadership Circle, that in order for efforts like this to sustain, there has to be funding pipelines, right? And so, really just a great example there. From here, we're going to move from talking about fiscal to finally talking about data and learning. And I'm going to be joined by Danielle Martin, who's going to talk. She's our director of our discovery and engagement team, and has been doing some really remarkable work focused on data in a handful of southern states. So Danielle, welcome. So glad that you're here, and we're so excited to hear about this work in data and learning.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks to our audience for joining today. So excited to talk about this really incredible process that Foster America has put into place. The discovery process is really just a set of tools where we're afforded the opportunity to get to know a site over a course of about a 6-month period to help them understand opportunities to innovate. The tool really involves talking to stakeholders, hearing their perspectives, and really dives deeply into their data. As you can see on the screen, the discovery is a 3-step process, which involves initiation. It's really curious inquiry. We want to know from their perspectives what's occurring, how that feels for families and children served, what challenges they might be facing. Ideation, which is that process of really thinking about all of the solutions, getting to know some opportunities for change. And that really culminates in the 3rd step of a roadmap report, where we issue recommendations, next steps for transformation, engaging that jurisdiction in the co-design throughout the process. The work really aligns with the mission and vision of Foster America that every child, youth, and family thrives. We believe that data-driven decision-making ensures that we have clear and authentic information that informs practice changes. It's not focused solely on risk aversion or only on quick remediation, but is thoughtful along that path of change and innovation, real system transformation. So an example of this work throughout the discovery process, as you said, Brian, really involving and digging into data. We're actively co-designing measures with a jurisdiction that will guide practice changes and really tell us whether or not the strategies that we're implementing and employing are actually improving outcomes for families and children. So that's the critical question. Are families left better in a situation than when we first met with them? It's an iterative process where we develop a baseline, we assess progress through subsequent outcome reports with the jurisdiction, and then we continuously assess opportunities to dig deeper and unearth root causes, pain points, and system challenges. We're really excited about this work because it's centered in co-design, brings to the table those who have been impacted by child welfare, and it really serves longer term, even when we leave that jurisdiction, as a resource to make well-informed, data-driven decisions that they can embed into their existing practices.
It's fantastic. And Danielle, as you were talking, I was reflecting back on similar to the Changemakers work, the discovery tool grew out of the best learnings from the prior fellowship model, right? And took all the best and thought, like, how can we shape this into a discovery tool? And I was reflecting also in the last year of shaping the tool, but also your team's work in implementing the tool in the jurisdictions and just watching the meaningful impact of having clear lead and lag measures and moving towards them in a systematic way. So really fantastic. Well, while the 3 of you are here, before you go, I want to just ask one question. This is not easy work. System change and system transformation work is really it's a long arc and it can be hard. I'm curious for each of you, if you could share maybe a recent observation about what brings you hope in this work, and specifically, what brings you hope that we can move systems from child welfare, traditional child welfare, to more of a child and family well-being system? And if it's okay, Danielle, we'll start with you.
Certainly. We are so honored to work with every jurisdiction and every TA partner. I think one of the examples, if I'm asked to isolate one, is to think about the incredible success that we've had with Mississippi and their reform efforts. During a recent meeting, the commissioner talked about the baseline and the outcome measures and indicated those measures will help their team serve as a resource and a tool to support their longer term executive and leadership decision making, and also welcomed a proposal regarding thoughtfulness around their capacity of their data team and continued evolution of this report. So in short, the report not only serves as a purpose for evaluating practice, it also provides an opportunity for voice and context storytelling about the way that we're serving families, which from that example seems to have a direct impact and can be absorbed into everyday practice.
Fantastic. So the combination between the data and the storytelling and the shifting of the narrative over time. Emily, would you mind going next? And what gives you hope?
I think what gives me hope right now, Brian, is the opportunity to work with partners outside of the traditional child welfare system. As part of Thriving Families, Safer Children in particular, we have partners in public health, locally community-based organizations, sister government agencies, and most importantly, people with lived experience who are all coming together to recognize that the work of family well-being and keeping kids and families safely and happily together and thriving requires shifting the work upstream and out of the lane of child welfare systems to a broader collective of people working together.
Fantastic. And we see that work in the visions and Thriving Families for sure. Thanks, Emily. Angela, last but not least, can you talk a little bit about hope and moving towards a well-being system?
I can. You know, one of my favorite parts so far being on the Foster America team is watching the number of tables grow where our lived experts outnumber county leaders, state leaders, community providers. That's groundbreaking, at least here in Colorado. It's really tipping the scales to allowing that voice to be the loudest around the table. And then accompanying that, having some deliverables, real measurable change on the backside of those conversations that are truly and genuinely reflective of the ideas and experiences and desires that lived experts are bringing to the table. That's where credibility is established. And in my opinion, that's where true transformation will happen and be sustained.
Angela, thank you. I don't know if you did this on purpose, but you touched on all four of our areas: co-design, collaboration, finance, and data and learning. So well done, and love that hope. And also just love you emphasizing at the end of our time together, just the importance of amplifying voice of folks that have been impacted by child welfare. Thank you each for joining us. I think right now Susan's going to come back and we're going to pass off to her. So thank you guys.
Hi. All right. Welcome. And I think we have the whole panel. Are we going to have everybody also join us? So DL, Des, Angela, Danielle, Emily, great. All right. Well, thank you all so much for sharing in a very short period of time the extraordinary work that's being done to really reimagine a better society, a society that really cares about its families and does what it needs to do to help them to thrive. We have several questions that have popped up in the chat. I want to start with one. It was the first question that came in from Kristen, asking about, it was for you, Angela, around Colorado, and how are you compensating people with lived experience how are you compensating the engagement, the feedback, the opportunities to involve them to be contributing towards designing and co-designing the systems that they want for themselves. You talked about that regarding the navigators, but can you talk more generally about how Colorado is going about doing that?
I can, and that's a great question. And it's been a priority of Colorado's for quite some time. One of the very first meaningful awards that the state of Colorado granted were grants across our jurisdictions of small and rural counties of dollars to allow them to start compensating lived experts who are coming to their tables at an hourly rate that is reasonable, right? It's no longer, and a lived expert said this to me, it's not a gift card and it's not pizza anymore. It's something that's really substantial and reflective of the expertise that they're bringing to the table. That has grown across all jurisdictions now. So as family voice councils, for instance, are being stood up, co-designed and developed and stood up, compensation is one of the top priorities. Now, the challenge that accompanies that, as in everything, is the sustainability of the fiscal supports available for that. So that's part of the ongoing work too. How do we keep that going, again, in a way that's really going to be meaningful to our lived experts?
Oh, wonderful. Well, thanks very much, Angela, both about the progress you're making and also about the honesty about how hard it is to make sure that we are in fact compensating parents for their time, for their wisdom, and the necessity of doing so. So this is a question that I'm going to pose to Des and Emily. How do we keep, it builds on this theme of involving people with lived experience. How do we make sure that in that engagement, we're not tokenizing the people whose expertise we know we desperately need?
I would say that it starts with care, compassion, recognizing their humanity and the great sacrifice that it takes to show up in those spaces. Unlike, race or gender, it's a choice to show up and say, I want to function as a lived expert, a person impacted by the child welfare system who may have experienced adversities and trauma, to say that I want to show up in that space, to be a part of solutions, is not something that we should take for granted. It's not something that we should re-traumatize them again. And so it's really acknowledging and honoring their humanity of showing up and being brave and saying, I want to show up and be a part of the solution. We shouldn't get in the way of that. We shouldn't minimize their contributions. We should protect, we should see, we should support, we should advocate and make way for. So that's what it's simple. Just connect and care.
Yeah.
I would agree completely with what Des said, and we'll build on it by saying, I think that in addition to starting from that place of kind of true relationship building, trust building, compassion and care, we need to kind of build our readiness to work in partnership meaningfully with lived experts. And I see that in 3 ways. First is the kind of structural readiness. Angela spoke about this a bit with regard to some of the kind of family voice councils, ensuring that there are kind of forums where people have repeated opportunities to be heard and have a seat at the table, that it's not a one-time ask for feedback or input, but rather an integral part of any initiatives or programs that we're setting up. With Thriving Families, Safer Children, each of our national work groups are co-led by someone with lived experience, and that's a really important seat to reserve. Secondly, I think that we need to work on building the capacity of our system partners, and I would include ourselves in that, to work in partnership. I think that requires some personal reflection, organizational reflection, and continued growth about how to make that space to recognize inherent power dynamics and learn to call them out and to work a little bit differently. And then I think we also need to continue investing in the professional development of our partners who are coming to the table and who might not all have a background in kind of organizational, formal organizational leadership roles, and who we want to position or allow them to kind of thrive. And by doing that, I think that we can really begin to build some of this into our new ways of working.
Well, thank you both for such a wonderful, wonderful answers, because you did cover both what what professionals need to do to change their behavior to be able to set a table that is in fact welcoming. And then Desiree, what does it mean to be welcoming? How do we honor the humanity of the people who are sharing their experiences and their stories with us to make that system better for other parents? It's an incredible gift that they are giving to be able to come to the table. So thank you for that. So I have a question for both. This is a question for, well, I'm going to come back to that. We have a question. It's a little bit of a provocative question, I think, which I love, which is if we want to, I think everybody is talking about making this child welfare system smaller, shrinking the system. The question is, how small is too small? And I'm going to ask anyone who wants to answer that question to do so.
I'll start, and I have two answers to that question. One is that we're nowhere near the point where it has become too small. So I don't think that, I think that's sometimes a question that is raised as a barrier to progress and a theoretical or philosophical question versus one that is a today's question. We're nowhere near that number yet, and we shouldn't let the answer to that question stop us from the important progress that we need to make today. I think the second answer to that question is that if and when we are successful in this generational work of moving ever closer to that number, that we should continue to listen to our communities and find from those who are experiencing the new systems that we're creating, if and when we are reaching a point where we need to change or make some sort of backstop. But I'm not letting that question interfere with the work that we know we must do today. And we're listening to the lived experts and community members these systems are serving, who are also telling us we're nowhere near that number yet.
Anyone else? Thank you, Marie. Anyone else want to add on to that? I think you did a great job, but Brian, are you ready to, do you want to say something?
Well, I like to chime in. I am an introvert and I like to organize all my thoughts first. And they're organized enough. I think an ideal answer to that, right? Anyone would agree. Like ideally, we would have a world where kids are all safe, right? And underneath that question is, what's the right number to know that like kids, that there's some unsafe kids that need child welfare. I think agreeing with Marie 1000%. Right now, many kids come to the attention of child welfare that just don't need child welfare. And you heard her say 5 million are turned away with nothing, right?
Right.
And so there's that, right? And so let's start there. Many that come to child welfare come because of life circumstance, things that happen, right? And or poverty. And so there's things that we can do about that. I would also just propose that many other people come to the attention of child welfare and they don't really necessarily need child welfare if other supports were in place around, right? And so, really thinking about all that. And then another arc, right, is that there are inequities in our world, right? And some of those inequities have really long downstream effects, right? That's a longer arc to fix, right? And so agreeing with Marie, like we're nowhere near that point yet of saying we're too small, right? But I think if we chipped away at all of that, we would find a really much smaller number than we have now. So that's how I might think about it.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. Thanks for adding that, Brian. So I think we have one other question. We have actually a couple more other questions, but you all have been doing this work for a long time. You've been in this field, many of you, for decades, myself included. What would you say is the biggest misconception about transformative work in child welfare? Or the possibility of transforming child welfare?
Can I chime in? Is that okay?
Sure.
Again, talk twice in a row. I think sometimes transformation and improvement get confused. And I just want to point out, like, improving systems of child welfare, making them more efficient is not transformation, at least in my definition. And I think what we really think about for those that are data folks, when I think about transformation, I'm thinking about fewer kids coming to the attention of a hotline
Right.
per 1,000 in the population. I'm thinking about fewer kids entering foster care per 1,000 in the population. I'm thinking, fewer kids experiencing harm in the population. And I think when we start thinking that way, what we're really talking about is building systems that make child welfare more obsolete, right? And that's distinct from improvement, which would be, how do we serve kids better in a system that already exists?
Thank you, Brian. And if you don't mind, I'm going to add on to that, because I do think that we have to really reconsider what we even mean by child welfare, and whose responsibility is it? And in fact, the responsibility for the welfare of children is a societal responsibility. It is not an agency's responsibility. And in order to get there, we need to be investing in families and making sure that they have what they need to. So I think that's part of it. Is like we think that transforming child welfare means we're transforming and changing a system, a public system that has been proven to be really problematic and harmful for families. And we need to rethink about what are we talking about for society? What kind of society do we want that is promoting the welfare of children and families? I want to, let's see, I'm going to look at my time. All right, I have two other questions. We're going to go really quickly on both of them, if you don't mind. One question that I have is talking about these circles. We have the National Leadership Circle, we have the Fiscal Leaders Circle. Just talk a little bit about what's the advantage of bringing people together? What do they get from coming together from across the country to sort of learn from each other? And DL or Desiree, either one could take this, or both.
I'm happy to hop in on this one. So I think to think about when like bringing them together, we know and we've learned that almost half of all funding for child welfare goes to foster care. And so when we think about that persistent challenge to our system or to the child welfare system, there's an approach where we could ask systems and then do research, extant literature research, and kind of just tell them what their problems are. But through the Fiscal Leadership Circle, we bring together 15 fellows across 11 jurisdictions to ask them, what are your challenges with really expanding the resources and service arrays for prevention? And I think that in learning what they're doing in Wisconsin or South Carolina, New York City, DC, we're learning that systems are trying their best to get families what they need before crisis. And so through this Fiscal Leadership Circle model, we kind of bust through a couple of silos. Mm-hmm. And so people are able to exchange ideas and kind of think about that wider prevention across the nation rather than just might be happening in their jurisdiction. So I think that's really cool and valuable work to do. Desiree, what about you?
It is.
I think providing space that validates experiences, that provides space for lived experts who are functioning in a variety of spaces to make sense out of what they're experiencing, to provide space to scaffold and develop skills and techniques to navigate issues of power and influence, and to create a community. Like our fellows don't end, the relationship doesn't end when the fellowship ends. It's really about creating relationships and connections and resources in a community, which I think is important for any of us, doing this work, that you need community, you need support. And so I think that we're pretty intentional about doing that. And so what gets me up and makes me come to work every day is knowing that, you're connecting with people who are trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I really am going to keep this to two questions. The last two questions, we're going to make them really short, but one I have to ask, which is how do you engage governments that are resistant to change? And I don't know if that's Danielle for you through the discovery process, or anyone else, Marie, Brian.
I would love to hear what Danielle has to say about this.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to answer. I think the discovery tool is set up in such a wonderful way that allows us to, first, as I explained earlier, I engage in a curious approach. And so it's hard, I think, for jurisdictions to manage all of the external noise. And so when we're coming in, if we can just be curious and ask questions, much like Desiree was saying, create an environment where there's a welcomed approach to learning, to being present, to really listening about what's working and what's not, diminishes some of the understandable anxiety around transformation. Even asking that question and having it answered is indicative of some of that reactionary piece that we sometimes are exposing jurisdictions to. And so again, the tool allows us to manage through some of those real reactions and challenges in a way that's meaningful to help then next identify what is the specific challenge and how can we help co-design a solution. We're not going in and saying, we have a great answer for you. We have an effective solution, as DL indicated. That is not a one-size-fits-all approach when we're talking about jurisdictional variances and population served. And so being curious, listening, being empathetic to the reality of the workforce needs and the jurisdiction, and then helping them to identify the challenges, I think helps us be best situated to reduce some of that resistance.
Oh, thank you so much, Danielle. And I think it also is right, acknowledging the bravery that jurisdictions bring when they say they're open to bringing in community partners, bringing in families to try to come up with a new solution because they know that what they have is not working. So thanks for that answer. So the last question I'm going to pose to Marie, which is for those, this is from someone who says, for those of us who are not part of the child welfare system, we're not working in child welfare, how can we become involved in this movement towards transformation, this movement of reimagining a different way of supporting families?
Sure, I'm going to run through a very short list. The first thing that I hope each and every person will do is tend to and care for yourself. The care of ourselves must always come first. And then as you do that and have space, tend to and take care of others in your own community and around you. Check in on those who are parenting, see if you can lend a helping hand, be a good community member wherever you are planted. Second, support a local organization that makes it a little bit easier to parent in this country that is not structurally well built to support parents. And there's so many wonderful community-based organizations all over the nation. Join in with them and help. Of course, we hope you'll support our mission. So you can donate to Foster America. You can spend your time with Foster America. We are publishing a newsletter quarterly. So subscribing to that newsletter or following us on LinkedIn is a nice way to stay in touch. And last but not least, we do have some open positions at our organization right now too. So we hope if those might be right for you or someone who Foster America could be an organizational home for people's personal missions, that you would put them in touch with us.
All right, well, and Noelle, we've just, in the link, you'll see a way to support Foster America. I want to thank each and every one of the panelists. I want to thank Foster America for the incredible work that you're doing, for those of you in the field, Angela, and others around the country that are transforming our supports for families. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.